The morning was joyful, sun was shining. Our girls were just thrilled to be putting on their red, white, and blue, and we got great spots on the parade route.
My family, Martin's family, we set up on a curbside. And then, 60 seconds later, we hear gunshots. Within seconds, my wife, who's facing towards where the gunfire is coming from, sees people falling. So I grab my 4.5-year-old and I run as fast as I can down the street, away from the direction of the gunfire.
Jason and I and our families are, quote unquote, the lucky ones from that day. 7 died, 48 were injured.
The suspect used a high-powered rifle. The
Highland Park community in mourning tonight as a reality.
Surviving a mass shooting has become a rite of passage in our country.
How is it acceptable for a civilian to have access to such a weapon? How do we allow that as a society?
Enough is enough! Enough is enough!
There was a feeling that we should try and prevent the tragedy that happened in our community from happening to other communities in our state and our country.
Not one more!
We have a significant amount of gun violence in the United States, but there's 2 aspects to the possibility of gun regulation. There might be political will behind it, especially involving like a mass shooting, for example, in Highland Park. But that doesn't address the legal issue, because the Supreme Court, with the Second Amendment, has been pushing more and more into this area, adjudicating things that a lot of people thought were settled law.
Daryl Miller, a Second Amendment scholar, has spent more than a decade studying America's gun laws and their effect on cities and states across the country.
There is a fairly long history going back to the founding era of both gun rights and gun regulation coexisting side by side. For 200 years, the court had used the militia clause of the Second Amendment to give it some context. If you wanted to have a gun, it had to be related in some way to the maintenance of a well-regulated militia.
Hey, look it! They got machine guns you can carry.
For example, the first federal firearms regulation of 1934 put a tax on things like machine guns or short-barreled shotguns, essentially trying to drive them out of the market because they were used by bootleggers and mobsters to commit violence. And the court said that kind of weapon actually has no relationship to a well-regulated militia, and therefore the law is perfectly constitutional.
Take our rights! We say no! DC gun ban has to go!
That changed 74 years later in a 2008 case called District of Columbia versus Heller, when the Supreme Court struck down a long-standing D.C. law that made legal handgun ownership virtually impossible.
It's the first case to essentially hold that individuals have rights to keep and bear arms for purposes completely unrelated to a well-regulated militia. And so after Heller, what happened was people had a right to say, I'm not a member of a militia, but I have a right to keep and bear arms in my home for personal purposes like self-defense.
That Supreme Court decision was limited in scope, as it only applied to federal areas like Washington, D.C. However, many other cities also had extensive restrictions on handgun ownership. Chicago passed its ordinance in the 1980s, spurred by rising crime and the assassination attempt on then-President Ronald Reagan.
The Chicago City Council decided to try to control handguns by severely limiting their registration.
In 2007, I came face to face with 3 men having broken into my home at my back sliding glass door. I literally was 8 inches away from their faces. I mean, to this day, I could tell you every pore, every scar on their faces.
Shaken by the experience, Colleen Lawson decided to apply for a handgun license, but was denied.
The city of Chicago told me, no, you can't have that. And I'm like, why? Because it's illegal. And why is it illegal? Because you can't have it. And this just went around like that. So I found it to be discriminatory.
Critics of Chicago's gun ban say this dramatic shootout on the city's south side highlights the problem with gun bans. Bad guys will find a way to get weapons, often leaving law-abiding citizens defenseless.
In 2008, shortly after the Heller decision, Colleen Lawson and her husband decided to take the city of Chicago to court. Gun rights organizations gathered together other plaintiffs from diverse backgrounds.
Otis McDonald has lived in this Southside Chicago neighborhood for 38 years, but says with gangs and drug dealers spreading in,
it's a nerve-wracking thing.
He'd feel safer if he could have a handgun.
Otis McDonald was significant for this case in part because gun rights organizations and gun rights lawyers had been looking around for quite a while to have essentially an African-American face to the issue of gun rights. And they found one in Otis McDonald.
This will give people like myself a little bit of a better feeling sitting in my own home.
What we had in common was our determination to end the constant bite of fear that we had felt.
2 years after filing suit to overturn Chicago's gun ban, Colleen Lawson and the other plaintiffs finally got their answer.
On its final day of its session, the Supreme Court today coming down in favor of gun rights in a controversial 5-4 ruling, one that is likely to spur more gun control lawsuits nationwide.
The Second Amendment, Alito wrote, applies equally to the federal government and the states. Justice John Paul Stevens said in dissent that the ruling would prove destructive to our nation's communities and to our constitutional structure. The ruling was a victory for the N.R.A., which has fought for decades to establish a constitutional right to own guns.
In my opinion, self-defense in America has been validated today.
Winning the case didn't just mean that we could have the right to have a handgun in our home. I mean, every home across the United States could. The Second Amendment right is a right, and you can't just pick and choose what parts of that you want.
The struggle to overturn Chicago's handgun ban turned Colleen Lawson into a gun rights advocate.
This is my traveling instruction kit that I keep at the training range.
And a firearms safety instructor.
Revolvers.
McDonald is really the culmination of a long arc by gun rights advocates to change the perception about the Second Amendment. And it was a successful campaign leading to where we are today.
Recent Supreme Court decisions have made it even harder for states and cities to regulate gun ownership by changing the calculus of what justifies limiting a citizen's Second Amendment rights.
The future of firearm regulation and rights in America is really in flux. And that makes it really, really difficult to sort of figure out what is, in fact, lawful or not.
Before the Highland Park shooting, I understood generally that the gun laws in this country were being challenged.
But our entire community was grieving and experiencing trauma. And for me, the fundamental question that I found myself asking after the parade shooting was, in order to affect change, how do we get more organized to get the outcomes that we want to make our society a safer place for our kids to grow up in?
We shouldn't have more kids dying from gun violence than motor vehicle accidents. One of my proudest accomplishments is that we were able to ban assault rifles and weapons in Illinois within a year of the Highland Park mass shooting.
That law is now on appeal, with critics claiming that it infringes on their right to self-defense. But gun control advocates like Rotter and Rawson say they will keep pressing the case for what polls estimate nearly 60% of Americans want: gun laws that balance regulation with Second Amendment rights.
The majority of gun owners that I've talked to are willing to give up small amounts of personal freedom to lower the amount of gun violence in our communities. The majority of Americans want to see that change.